I'm Tim. I work for Alpha Canada, and I'm here with my friend Rob Hoogendoorn, who is the pastor at Forest City Community Church in London, Ontario. And Rob, I would love just to chat with you a little bit today. Imagine, if you will, that I am a room full of pastors, and that you and I are together with them, and we're able to articulate some of the things that are on your heart when it comes to Alpha, about your experience, some of the ways that you would encourage or perhaps even challenge them with their Alpha experience. And so as we get started, I would love for you just to articulate and share some of your own story as a senior church leader at a church with your experience running Alpha and what that journey has been like for you.
Yeah, listen, Alpha's been it's been a journey for me and our church that goes back quite a few years. So when I'd say 10, even 15 years ago, we were running Alpha, and we ran it every single year, and we would do it once a year, and we had this whole group of people that loved Alpha, and I loved them because they were evangelists, and I've got a heart for evangelism, and so I was always a cheerleader of our Alpha community, and I would encourage them, and I would at times say, "Hey, everybody, we're doing another Alpha," but Alpha was done by them, sort of in a room down the hallway, and it was never really connected too much to the church. And I sort of thought that's how Alpha went. And I was a fan of it, but I wasn't in it personally. And so every year I would be advocating for it, and we would run it, but it was its own little thing. And I would even hear about stories, and sometimes I'd even show up on the last night and I'd hear about some of the stories, and I would be like, well, that's awesome. But it was something that I didn't really participate in with myself. And then there was a turning moment for me that actually happened. I'm going to say it was about 5 years ago. I was at one of these experiences where I was at Holy Trinity Brompton in the UK, and I remember Nicky talking a little bit about his involvement in Alpha. And I remember sitting there listening to him, because in my mind, I was not involved in Alpha because I was the senior pastor of the church. We planted this church 27 years ago, and it's become a large church. And so in my mind, the only way churches get large is if you delegate a lot. And so I delegated everything. And part of my thought was, well, I can't get really involved in Alpha. I'm a busy pastor. And I remember Nicky talking a little bit about this, and I remember him saying that he has personally been in every single Alpha that church had done for the last like 30 years or something. And it hit me, and I thought, okay, Nicky Gumbel leads a church bigger than mine. His life is more complicated than mine, and he's got a lot of outside areas that he's involved in that's more than mine. And I thought, if he can actually be in an Alpha group every time they do one, why can't I? And that was a pivot moment for me. And something about that said to me, okay, I'm going to try that. Yeah. I'm going to try when we do Alpha as a church. I'm not going to lead it, but I'm going to be in one of the groups. And that really started changing our whole Alpha approach.
What was it like for you the first time you walked in this new sort of mindset? I'm going to sit down, I'm going to be a part of running a group. What was it like night one, walking into Alpha for the first time with this mindset of, I'm involved now, I'm a helper, I'm engaging this way?
I mean, it was a remarkable time for us as a church. And I think part of it was God's hand was in all kinds of things that led up to that. But it was very different because, well, first of all, that first one that I also stepped in, when we really got into Alpha big time, we had 500 people show up. And so I'll never forget seeing the lineups of people waiting to get into the Alpha experience that time. So that was, of course, very, very impacting for me. But for me, being in it for the very first time, you have more skin in the game. All of a sudden, this isn't just a program that's happening out there. All of a sudden, these are real people. This is part of our church's reaching into our community. And I'm going to be a part of this in a very intimate way over the next 10 weeks.
How do you think that personal engagement for you, putting names to faces and having a more intimate connection with what's happening, how did that change your strategic placement of Alpha within your church ministry, within the other programs and things that were happening? How did that shift for you because you were part of it?
It certainly shifted how we present Alpha in our church as a whole. because when people know that as the senior leader that I'm all in on it, it certainly, and senior pastors know this, your voice, you have a disproportionate voice in your church. And when people saw that this was important enough to me to be that important, I think everybody in the church, everybody took Alpha more seriously. Everybody realized, hey, this is something we all can be a part of to position the hope of Jesus to our community with. And so I think our whole church then started to understand and prioritize this expression of evangelism that comes through Alpha. That definitely changed. It got onto the calendar of our promotional approach regularly. And so we would regularly, like we do, we vision cast Alpha for a few weeks before every Alpha season now. And it affects the rhythm of our church a lot more now.
Okay, so if that's how Alpha has helped your church, and sort of move some strategy forward and position itself well in your congregation, what has it done for you personally in your own journey, your own walk, your own ministry even?
When I think about who wins at our church because of Alpha, when I actually think who wins because of Alpha, and now that it's a more central aspect of who we are as a church, the list is, it's pretty clear. To me, who wins is we are reaching more people. So people who don't know Jesus are winning, absolutely. And another group of people who win are people who now get to be a part of that journey, who enter into the Alpha ministry, whether they're a host, a helper, whether they help set up or prepare food or whatever. They all win because they're part of something special. But I have to say, and I didn't expect this, I didn't expect that I would kind of win so much personally. Being in an Alpha group has been, I just want to say, it's been transformative just for me as a pastor. I started this church 27 years ago, and when I started the church, my wife and I started it kind of from scratch, and the first few years, I had a personal engagement with just about everybody who started a faith journey here. And I was really, regularly on the front lines of seeing how God was working in people's lives. And then the church grew. And as a church grows, what happens is you have to get more people involved in things, as I did. And you get to a point in any church, any pastor who has a bit of a larger church, doesn't have to be really big, but even a little larger, you start getting removed from the front line of really how things are happening in people's lives. And what I found was when we went into Alpha, and I sort of got this whole pivot, and I thought, no, I'm going to be in an Alpha group every time. It brings me every single week for like an hour and a half right back into the front lines. And I journey with these people, and I hear these stories, and I watch people in front of my eyes move from skepticism and anger and brokenness to openness, and then curiosity, and then desire, and then embracing of Jesus and experiencing the love that the Holy Spirit pours into their life. I cannot explain to people and other pastors how life-giving that is to me. That's like gasoline in my tank. Yeah. And it's powerful. So part of the reason I do it is kind of for me.
And I bet it has to impact the way that you preach and the way that you teach, even as you're preparing topics or thinking through, right? How have you felt that impact?
Yeah, it does. It affects the way you preach as well, because, and again, when you're now preparing talks or speaking, you're no longer thinking just abstractly. I know every preacher tries to, and I've always tried to, think about the people I'm speaking to. But when you actually have Jim in your mind, or you have like Rachel in your mind, and you realize they're also probably listening. It changes the immediacy and the clarity with which you try to communicate even in your preaching. So absolutely, it affects that too.
Yeah, and I would imagine that the challenges that you're trying to address aren't abstract. They're connected to specific people, and that would impact how you communicate. So as you think through, Alpha has done a lot of good things. Has it always been easy? Has it, what's the journey been like? Is this a quick plug and play and everything will just work? Share with me some of the challenges maybe that you've had along the way.
we have had a lot of fruit from Alpha. There's no doubt about it. And Alpha as an organization does make running Alpha and incorporating into a church pretty easy, in the sense that they provide so many great resources that you're able to access. But I do think it's so important for people to realize that, and especially church leaders to realize, it's pretty hard too. Like, there's a lot of things about running Alpha that requires persistence. Here's one of the things I've noticed. I've noticed this in pastor friends of mine, is they'll try to run an Alpha or two. And they'll run it. And they will sort of feel like, hey, it didn't come as it was advertised. And I'll say, well, why not? Well, they'll say, well, all we primarily got were just people from our church who took it. And they'll go, oh, yeah, we might have had, 3 or 4 people who weren't from our church, but we didn't really feel like it had evangelistic impact. And that's why we thought we were supposed to do this. And so I think churches at times do try it, and then they're discouraged by the fact that they're not really reaching people. And what I would say to that is, it's true, it takes you time to get beyond your already convinced people. It takes a number of Alphas to start bringing into the DNA of your Alpha and the people flow, the actual people I know that every pastor actually wants to reach. But that's where it takes persistence. It just takes patience. People give different numbers, but I think Nicky Gumbel has talked about how it takes like 8 or 9, and that seems like an awful lot. But you know what? I would say, because I've been thinking about this, I've probably been in 10 consecutively now in the last few years. So every year we do 3, and I'm in. And here's what I've noticed, even in our experience. The first ones we ran, the percentage was much higher of Forest City Community Church people. And every time we do it, we get fewer of them, and we get more and more people who were previously not churched at all. The ratios keep changing, but you got to stay with it, because it's hard. A little bit like when we planted this church in the mid-90s. At the beginning we had nobody, and you just sort of stay at it, and you just stay at it for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, even if you're not immediately seeing it. So that's one thing I try to say to people. Now, I do think that anybody runs Alpha, you're going to see things already, but kind of don't be too bothered by the first course or two that maybe doesn't have as many like non-Christian people as you'd like to have in them. I think the other thing it's important to realize is it is hard for churches to navigate in their church with their own people. Another challenge I find is we have really well-meaning people in our church who get into a group and they kind of ruin it. And that's really discouraging. It's discouraging for the host, the helper, because they see this person from the church who's making it harder because it's, Mary know-it-all, or Frank the Bible expert. And one of the other things that's hard for churches is to find a way to protect their Alphas from well-meaning Christians in their church. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge because you have to deal with these people, gently and pastorally. But if you don't, it just discourages you unnecessarily.
Yeah. What do those conversations look like? So if you're sitting down with one of those troublesome guests, how do you pastor them through that?
I don't know. I have somebody else do it usually, but honestly, I think sometimes it's just a matter of explaining to them. Here's the thing that people don't realize is that, especially when you're doing Alpha, is the hosts and the helpers, they get training. They get training for how to keep the group safe for non-Christian people. What we don't realize is that the Christians who sometimes sign up in your church as Alpha, they don't get that training.
Right.
And they don't have the benefit of that. And so what you end up having to do is you have to do some one-off conversations with them. And sometimes just, because some of them actually just need a one-on-one, where you just sort of say, listen, Henry, I know you love this and I know you want to help these people, but you have to understand that you being the answer man is not helping. And so sometimes you got to do that. That's one way to do it. The other way we try to do it is we just try to do that where we say this to everybody. Like, we'll say that in the first couple of alphas. We'll say to everybody, we'll say, hey, listen, we know that here in our alpha groups, we've got the whole range. Some of you have maybe been a Christian for a while. Some of you don't really know anything about the Bible. And you're not a Christian, and everything in between. So let's all respect each other and give each other a chance to just have our perspectives on that. Because when you do that, you're actually not only speaking to the non-spiritually engaged person, you're also speaking to the Christian and helping them recognize how they need to act in this.
Right, and you're also, I guess, sort of affirming the place is a safe spot to be, because you're setting clear guidelines. Have you found a way to nuance even when you introduce it or when you're announcing it to the congregation, to bring out some of that? Like, because you've obviously introduced a number of alphas over the years. Yeah. Have you found ways to tweak even the way that you present it to the congregation to help them understand the real purpose of what alpha is supposed to be?
Yeah, I think for us, we developed some language around that pretty early on. And our language started sort of taking shape where when we would announce it, we would basically say to our community, we would say, hey, listen, if you're somebody who has been coming to this church for a little while, but you would identify yourself as, I'm still not sure, or I'm right on the edge, or maybe I'm a brand new Christian, but you're in that sort of early ground, we'd say, Alpha is for you, and we'd love for you to come. And then what we'd say is, and then to everybody else, what we would say is, if you have people in your life who maybe they haven't even stepped into church, but that's where they are, a family member, a friend, a colleague, somebody you work with, who that this might actually be a fantastic experience for them to explore faith, please help us and be the ambassador that throws the invitation out to that person. So we try to do it that way to keep it from sounding like, hey, alpha is just a great thing for everybody. Right. Because, boy, you can make your own alphas really hard if you just throw it open to all of your regular people.
Right. It's just helping them have a framework even for the invitation that they're sharing with other people. Cool. If we could just for a moment, let's maybe pull back a bit of the curtain of Forest City, and if you could just unpack how Alpha fits into the broader ministry strategy. So in terms of all of the other parts of the system that are going, where does Alpha fit into that story?
Well, I would say Alpha fits in our overall rhythm in a number of ways. Number one, you think about what most churches understand in terms of their vision, their calling. I think most churches would say, part of what we're supposed to be doing in this world is we're supposed to be advancing the message of Jesus to new people. So evangelism is part of that. And then most churches realize, but we're also responsible to grow and disciple and nurture existing believers. So there's kind of a part A, part B to the general framework of most churches. And so for us, in terms of Alpha helps our church get really clear about and explicit about our efforts as a church in terms of evangelism, in our context, at least a few times a year. In the rhythm of our church, we look at some of these major, what I call sort of sociological open doors that happen every year that make inviting easy. And for us, they would be like Christmas, Easter, a kickoff series of the fall, something like that, where we know that in society in general, people might be more receptive to an invitation to start a faith journey. But then the rhythm of the Alpha course does the same thing. So for us, 3 times a year, we just throw the door open and we say, hey, let's be on a bit of an inviting binge. Right. And it helps us sort of systematic. One of the ways I put it, it sort of institutionalizes evangelism in a church. Yeah. Because we institutionalize the things that we think are important, right. But we often don't think about evangelism that way. We think about it as being, well, if the Spirit comes over me, well, yeah, Spirit will come over you, but sometimes we just need to set it out and so Alpha does that. I think the other way it fits in is it helps us lay the foundations of discipleship orientation in the lives and the hearts of newer Christians, and it gives them a really strong grounding all in one sort of semester in terms of to put the foundation in place for their ongoing Christian development.
I want to give you just kind of two moments to speak directly to two different audiences. So the first audience would be if there's a pastor that's watching this that is interested to know why Alpha should matter for them, why it should be a part of their church, if they're considering running it but they're not quite sure, they've got some hang-ups or hold-ups somewhere. Peer-to-peer, how would you express to them the significance or the value of running Alpha in their church?
I mean, this is just me. I think every church should, and I think even more interesting, every church can run Alpha. I mean, every church should sounds pretty strong. Listen, maybe as a church, you've got some fantastic evangelistic traction happening in different other ways. Okay, great, go for it. But if you don't, and you struggle, which by the way, I'd say 90% of churches struggle. Here's this one gift that allows any church to sort of step into the stream of what's been happening around the world now for many years, sort of this proven way of helping introduce new people to Jesus. So I would be saying, you know what, you got to give it a try. And when you give it a try, like I said, don't just do it once. Give it a try and say, we're going to do it like 4 times. Now, don't feel too bad don't try to necessarily start real big. That's the other thing is you don't have to start big. You can start with one Alpha group. You can find 3 or 4 people to actually start the Alpha ministry at your church, which I think is another lovely thing because it's so scalable. But that would be my encouragement. My encouragement would be, you know, if you're in a church and you say, we are struggling with evangelistic lethargy, we're just not, I cannot think of a better tool than Alpha.
The other audience just to think about is you from 4 or 5 years ago. So the senior church leader that loves that Alpha runs in their church, but are still a little bit of, that's great, other people are doing it. And so how would you speak to yourself with what you know now, where you were then?
It's hard for me to overstate how much more vital Alpha can become for your church when you personally are involved. Now, let me just say this, let me be clear. Me as the senior pastor, and I wouldn't say, and to any other senior pastor, I don't run the thing, I don't organize the thing, I don't recruit for the thing, I don't even host the group I'm in. But I do step in and I am a helper in a group.
Right.
So that's really important because I don't need another thing to be running around the church. I don't. But for me to step in and right away step right into the front lines and be able to engage and watch and participate in the faith transformational journey of people is priceless. And so that's, in some respects, that would, my deepest desire for pastor would be to be saying, you know, don't rob yourself of this. Even just forget for a minute what it might do for your church. I would just say, my hope for you is that it would help you and bless you because it's like rocket fuel to my heart as a pastor of just being in that simple rhythm every single week when we're running an Alpha.
I think it's really important, even the way that you framed it, is that it's not for you to come in and take over or necessarily run. It's not another thing for you to take on, but it's a place for you to participate and to even sit side by side with the people in your congregation that are serving and demonstrate and model that for them. That's beautiful. As we come to close, is there 1 or 2 more things that you would want to say to somebody who's watching this as a pastor to pastor, heart to heart, about your experience, about something that is, you know, maybe even an intangible benefit that you've gained, something that you say, if I were to boil it all down to 1 or 2 ideas, this is what they are.
Yeah, so listen, as a pastor, you're only going to have so many hours, so many years, so many opportunities to fulfill your calling and to follow through on why you actually felt God calling you into this in the first place. And so I think that because reaching out with the hope of Jesus to people who haven't heard yet is so foundational, I think my encouragement to any pastor would be to say, like, stay in that game. And the temptation really is strong, I get it, is to migrate to the bubble of those people that are in your life and in your church who are all kind of in the fold already. But Alpha, it keeps pushing and leading and encouraging us to also be moving outward, to look outward and to act outward with the greatest hope that people can find in this world, and that is people who haven't heard, people who don't know, people who need to know. And that's what changes people's lives. And so, rather shamelessly, I'd say, pastors, listen, you got to stay in that. You just got to stay in it.
That's incredible. Thank you so much, Rob, for sharing your heart with us today and for talking, having this conversation with us. Thank you so much.